All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Swedenborgian Life, and today we're going to look at the nuanced niche subject, the purpose of creation. Take a look at what is God's purpose for creating and why, what role do we play, and we're going to look at completing the circle. So today we're going to look at the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Which was famously asked by Leibniz in 1697 and was certainly asked many times before that and has probably been asked by all of us at some point during the more annoying times in our lives. However, this is a point that we could theorize and argue about ad nauseum from a lot of different angles, as people have been doing for hundreds of years. But so rather than trying to eat the whole pie, we're just going to look at Swedenborg's claim that he got the answer directly from the source. He wrote, "The goal of creation is that everything should return to the Creator, and that there should be a union." He describes a kind of circle or cycle with this return, and we want to look at it, our place in it, and why the whole thing is here in the first place. So stay tuned. Okay, welcome back. It's great to have you guys here. Monday nights are a good night. Glad to be here with all of you. My name is Curtis with the Swedenborg Foundation. Swedenborg Foundation is a non-profit that works to get the ideas of Swedenborg and similar ideas out into the conversation in the hopes that those conversations will do some kind of good. My guests today are Chuck, Blair, and Chara Daum. Welcome back to the show. Chuck is senior pastor at New Church Live, which you can access newchurchlive.tv, and Chara Daum is a Latin consultant for the New Century edition of Swedenborg's works. Thanks, guys, for coming on.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Curtis.
Appreciate it. These are good people. Glad to be having this conversation with both of you. So let's get right down to it. We're going to be talking about, just like the point of life, or what it is. And so we're going to talk about it, but you guys can talk about it as well. We do a segment at the end, as you probably know, where we take your live questions and comments. So start entering them now. You just go on YouTube, write it there. If you're on Facebook, write it there. Wherever you found us, write it. We'll try to find it. We'll pull it up. So we'll get to that in the second half. You probably have thoughts on the subject as well. Okay, let's get into our first segment, which is, what is God's purpose in creating and why? And I'm going to start this one out with a long, meaty quote out of Swedenborg. And this is from Divine Providence, number 27. "The Lord did not create the universe for his own sake, but for the sake of people he would be with in heaven. By its very nature, spiritual love wants to share what it has with others, and to the extent that it can do so, it is totally present, experiencing its peace and bliss. Spiritual love gets this quality from the Lord's divine love, which is like this in infinite measure. It then follows that divine love, and therefore divine providence, has the goal of a heaven made up of people who have become angels and are becoming angels, people with whom it can share all the bliss and joy of love and wisdom, giving them these blessings from the Lord's own presence within them. He cannot help doing this because his image and likeness is in us from creation. His image in us is wisdom, and his likeness in us is love. And the Lord within us is love united to wisdom, and wisdom united to love, or goodness united to truth, and truth united to goodness, which is the same thing." So it's hard to know where to cut off those quotes, and I probably let that one run way too long, but I just feel like there's all these little interesting nuances to it that I want to get in there. I've used the word nuance twice now, and the show is young. We'll see if it pops up again. So let's kind of take this apart and look at what he's saying here. The first line is, "The Lord did not create the universe for his own sake, but for the sake of people he would be with in heaven." And so if I was listening to the show, I would say, what? So he only created the universe for some people? What about the people that aren't in heaven? So, Chara, can you put my fears to rest?
I certainly can. Heaven is for everybody. And the Lord loves everybody, and God wants all of us all to be together in love. And if we don't want to be part of that, that's fine. But so people he would be with in heaven, it's not like he's at the gate saying, you in, you out. Right. It's our choice. Do we want to go there? Do we want to be in that kind of state? Do we want to be in that kind of all-encompassing love? Or is that just too much to take?
Yeah, and I know Swedenborg talks about even people who reject that, and if you reject mutual love, you come into a state of selfishness, which Swedenborg would call hell. But he said even there, God is still there, trying to make their life as good as it can be. within that. So I just want to point out it's not this like, okay, I made the whole universe and everyone in it for this little subset. But so Chuck, I'd love to hear some initial thoughts.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how Swedenborg's really clear that we're predestined for heaven. I mean, that's the whole way it's set up. Like, it's set up for us to win. Yeah. That's the way God has it going. And that idea that if we're predestined for heaven, that there's only a divine providence to pull us to heaven. There's not a divine providence from hell to pull us to hell. I mean, it's all set up for it to work. And I think about the about casinos. Like, casinos, the house is supposed to win like 60% of the time, and you're supposed to win 40%, and that if a casino keeps you gambling long enough, it wins. And that's the way I see God.
That's why I lost all my money.
That's it.
Yeah. Yes, right. So that's just important for us to establish up front that God is creating this thing, not just like, okay, I'm going to make in excess all these people, and it's only for some people. So moving on, it follows. So he's saying that divine love, spiritual love, wants to love something and make something happy outside of itself. And so it seems that the point of everything is that, okay, there's people outside of God, so now God can make them happy. And Cara, you had an interesting point before we started about that kind of mirroring another statement Swedenborg made about our own duties to each other.
Yeah. One of his statements is that we are born not for ourselves, but for others. We're not born for our own sake, but for the sake of others. And I just never noticed that in connection with this, the first sense of that quote, that the Lord did not create the universe for his own sake, but for the sake of other people. So it's our usefulness to other people. It's what we can do for other people that connects us all. And that vision of what the creation of me is about is to like a microcosm of the macrocosm of what the Lord created the whole universe about.
So everybody's got to play by the same rules, even God. That God is, that ideally, and really that brings the most lasting, fulfilling happiness is this: you're living for something outside yourself, for a cause or for other people, and that God is doing the same thing. And I want to talk about this union here. He says that. Probably if you're new to Swedenborg, the whole last part of that quote just sounded like blah, 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 because he's like the love and the wisdom and the truth and the goodness, and this is how Swedenborg talks, because he's describing things in these really technical terms. But he's saying God's image in us is love and wisdom, and that it's by us, if we live lovingly and live to the best of our knowledge, which would be wisdom, then we're acting like God is acting. So there is this connection there. Is that how you would read it, Chuck?
Yeah, and I think probably all of you listening, have had that experience, right, where you have something you're deeply passionate about,
right,
and something you actually know something about as well. And when they intersect, it's great, because there's things I know things about that I frankly don't care about. There's other things I really love and I suck at. Yeah. So where it really comes together is where there's those things that I have a passion and I also have some insight in terms of how it functions. Yeah. And when I do that, what do I want to do? I want to create. I want to create something outside of myself, and if I can come through that rubric of serving others, it brings a lot of life into the world.
Absolutely, that's a great point. That we feel that experience, and that's this tiny little, there's a tiny little sample of the God universe interaction, and so we're going to get more to that. Let's get to our second segment here, which just happens to be what role do we play. So I want to look at, we had an image in the opening monologue. You guys remember that monologue? It was really good. Opening monologue where there's like this circle so there it is. That's us at the tip there. So, Swedenborg is describing there's a circle, and then the role that we can play as conscious people that have the ability to reflect is we can be this sort of return point of God going through creation back to God, and thus connecting everyone. So let's take a look at what Swedenborg wrote here. This is Divine Love and Wisdom 49. In regard to God, loving and being loved in return are not possible in the case of others who have some share of infinity or anything of the essence and life of intrinsic love or of divinity. If there were within them any share of infinity or anything of the essence and life of intrinsic love, of divinity that is, it would not be others who would be loving God. He would be loving himself. And so what I sort of take this as, okay, so, right, I get it, God, that you make life because you want to set it up so that, in the eternal sense, people can be super happy and super plugged in. But why do you make it so that I don't know where my car keys are? Like, why can I not fly? Why all these limitations? And it sort of seems to me like the way I read that is that, God is infinite. So if infinity is out everywhere, so if anything, you can't have two infinities. Because otherwise, where does one stop and where does the other end? So we have to be finite, and it's because if God is infinite and we're finite, and these are these distinct differences, then we actually can reach out to each other, and there can be love between two things that are distinct, rather than just God loving God,
just
right?
like a big blob of. Yeah. Something about the individuality that our individuality is something. Even if we are connected with God, Swedenborg says that the closer we're joined with God, the more ourselves we are, and so that illustrates that there's the two different things. In order to be conjunction, there has to be two separate things.
Chuck, doesn't Swedenborg say that variety is perfection, or that a truly perfect thing has to be made out of a harmony of elements rather than all the same element?
Right. And we tend to think of that as being division. It's not. It's diversity.
Yeah.
It's an ecosystem that we're all to play our role in, and through that we can be in harmony. I love where Swedenborg talks about influx is according to the state of the receiving vessel, and it's not a vessel like a bowl. It's a vessel like a blood vessel. It's what allows God to go through us, and the more we work on sort of quieting our ego and being in a loving place, the more God can do that work through us in ways that are unique forms. We are unique forms of God's finited love. I think that's kind of what Swedenborg was driving at.
Yeah, and that we can receive, as it was talking about in the first quote, that love and wisdom, these two things that Swedenborg says, this is the essence of God, is love and wisdom, and whatever that means at its deepest recesses, that these are things that we can relate to as conscious beings, and say, okay, I know what life is set up, so we can say, I know what love is, and I know what wisdom is, and I can put these together in service of other people. I know what serving other people is, and that we are able to close this loop because we can actually understand that and do it consciously, and that we have there's this choice to be helpful or to be harmful, so we actually can make a conscious, autonomous choice to say, I want to be like you to God. And by doing that, we kind of connect this circle. So let's take a look at that runs right into our third one. So let's get to our very last topic, which is completing the circle. And this is a little more about sort of the function that we can play, as particularly as human beings. That I'm pretty sure everyone watching the show is a human being. Animals are great, but there's sort of a different kind of consciousness that people have. The Swedenborg describes it. You don't get mad at if a tiger is killing someone. Okay, well, it's not evil, because it's got these instincts and it's got to do it. If people are killing people, you say they should not be doing that. And so this is a little bit of that, and sort of where we fit in, as that animals and plants, everything is living its life exactly how it should, but we kind of can either live in a way that's contrary to order or with order. And so this, because we have that choice, and because we can step back and kind of think like, okay, what's really going on here, and have an idea of, there is a creator. I can look outside myself. We can play a special little role as kind of this final connecting piece. So let's take a look at that image again of this sun with the loop. So the idea is that this thing comes out of God and goes through everything that's been created, all material, all life, everything, and then comes back to God. And that we humans can play this part of reconnecting that circuit, because we can know that there is God, and intentionally accept that inflow. So let's take a look at this quote. This is from Divine Love and Wisdom 170. So through this union, and Swedenborg is talking about the union that comes when we accept love and wisdom and bring them out. The Lord is present in every work he has created. As a result, the function of all created things rise level by level from the lowest things to us, and through us to God the Creator, their source. And so, the point is not to feel like, oh, we're better than other things. But, Cara, as you mentioned in another show, lowest and outermost, and also inmost and highest, those could be the same. That's the same Latin word, right?
Same Latin word, right, that's it.
So you don't have to think about it as other things in the universe are lower. It's just like, outermost. And then we're just playing a role. If all those things weren't playing their role, if the circuit's broken at any loop, in any part of the loop, it doesn't work. But what Swedenborg is saying is everyone else is already there. But we're the ones who have to consciously choose to kind of take our place.
Yeah.
So how do we do that, Chuck?
Well, I think I'm going to come at it, sort of go to New Jersey by way of Ohio.
Yeah, it sounds good, man.
I love Swedenborg's idea that, our imperfection is our perfection. And for an animal's perfection, that's actually their imperfection, because an animal can only be what it is, and we can actually be so much more than who we currently are. And that's maybe I remember Nomes, who was the president of Harvard Divinity School, he said, that's the essence of Christianity, that you can be more than who you are. And I think so part of being part of that loop is just understanding that we are imperfect. And it's in that striving, and can we deliver our best intentions on God's behalf? Like that, constantly trying to ally our intentions around what God's intentions are, which goes back to loving, goes back to connecting. I mean, the whole word religion, religio in Latin, means to reconnect. I mean, that's the whole point of it, is trying to reconnect and create those circuits. So it's an embracing of, look, we're imperfect, but what a fun journey. How much fun is it to work through this stuff, to slog through this stuff? And I love the quote, why did God create us? Well, why did he create us? Because he thought we'd enjoy it.
Yeah. I think, and if you don't enjoy it now, maybe you will later.
That's
I think
right.
about, as I mentioned, I think last show, like near-death people have near-death experience. Most people are upset with aspects of life, but when people have these near-death experiences and they get shown kind of the why and the what, everybody comes back like, okay, this is cool, I'm fine with that. So I was thinking about, and you, Chuck, you were mentioning, you try to do God's will, but nobody knows. You just try your best, and obviously some people have really destructive ideas about what God wants, and that kind of thing. So. But you can, and really we talk about what God wants, but Swedenborg said God is love and wisdom. So you can't sort of separate it like God wants something that's not loving. So we all, even if we all have an experience of what love is, and the more we're moving towards that, the more you're sort of aligning with what God is or want, so, and the more that you're doing that, the more you're kind of connecting this, because then you're receiving this inflow from God on a new sort of level and kicking out. So did you guys have any final thoughts before we move into our question segment?
I think that's
good.
I
think it sounds great.
We must have covered. So we set out, what's the point of creation? And in 15 minutes, we got it. Like that. All right. So don't forget to enter your questions and comments now, and we'll see you guys right after 15 seconds of video. Okay, so now is the part of the show where we get to hear thoughts, questions, comments from everybody, and we'll do our best to screw up answering them. So let's take a look at our very first one. This is from Judith on YouTube. Does Swedenborg ever imply that this present world we live in will, though more and more living the right, loving lives, eventually change into one of the heavenly worlds, i.e. become the kingdom? So, Chuck, you had a reaction to that. So do you want to start it?
That is a great question. I was preaching on that actually this past Sunday, and because that's the whole point is the kingdom. I mean, we're not talking that we're looking at an evacuation strategy from life. That's not what this is about. This is about actually incarnationally inhabiting life as best we can. And your question, I would certainly hope so. I would certainly hope so. I don't know the future, but it sure seems like human beings in many ways have evolved, and maybe that evolution can continue, and we'll just see the kingdom becoming more and more part of this world, which is what God intended. And he said, the kingdom of God is in your midst.
Yeah.
Like it's here. The question is, are we open to it?
As in heaven, so upon the earth.
Yeah.
And I think about, we were talking before about, you can see somebody living a certain way,
right,
and say that's not, and we can all look at society and say things could be better than this. And the fact that we have that sense of that, like things could be better than this. And are there people suffering here? Is there harm here? Yeah. So obviously it should be better. It should be better than it is. And certainly there's all kinds of potential. In Swedenborg, he talks about, there were other times in humanity's history where there was a much tighter connection. People could really interact with angels, and there was just much more clarity about what was good, and there was and we had better impulses and these kinds of things. So certainly, and it's just sort of a part of, it's a little bit of what Swedenborg is talking about when he talks about the new church. This idea that there's going to be a new epoch, where there is this sort of closer connection. So I would say definitely yes. Cara, do you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, my only thought is that I read an article last weekend, the last line of which was, it's not about us getting into heaven, it's about us getting heaven into us, about getting heaven into us. So that if we can all be open to the kingdom in our own hearts, that's what's going to bring the kingdom onto earth. Yeah. It's not that this world is going to be transformed into some other, universe.
Right. Well, and Swedenborg will even talk about the lower mind, as he calls it, earth being a word for that, and the inner mind, heaven. There's a better part, like your best self, or like your higher principle. There's some things that this is how I want to be, but I can't always be like that. And that there's sort of a process where we can bring how we want to be into the gritty situations, and that through that you actually are bringing a little heaven into earth. Anyway, a lot of things we could say about that. Thanks for the question. That proves it was a great question. A+. Okay, let's take a look at our next one. This is from Mark. Why does a loving God allow some people to suffer a lifetime of pain, misery, or suffering? It seems some people are denied access to God's blessing. Is God fair? Yeah, so, the problem of evil.
Right.
So it's certainly, I like that people are indignant about, you're telling us that this is all love, but, a lot of people are suffering here. Right. Because it's true, people do suffer a lot. My initial thoughts about that are, God focuses on eternity. Swedenborg wrote this book called Divine Providence, which we saw one quote from today, which basically is saying that this is the reason why things are like they are, is God is focusing on eternity. And there's no suffering that's being allowed here that isn't going to eventually bring benefit. My life has been really good in a lot of ways, and there's also been a lot of suffering. The way that Swedenborg is talking about it, the suffering is bringing benefit in certain ways. Just in the and you do see that people will. I've referenced this before. There's a study about people who went through like a major tragedy and lottery winners, and a few years down the road, actually, the people who had been through tragedy were happier than lottery. And you see in children. If you get everything you want, if you don't have to deal with adversity, you get everything you want. It actually, you get what they call spoiled, which sort of your character suffers from that. Now, obviously, it's a whole different level of what people are suffering out in the world, but there's the same sort of idea that even in the experience of suffering, there are these greater gifts being implanted of empathy, of humility, of like freeing our. So obviously, to talk about all the suffering people go through would be a huge conversation, but. It might sound like a cop-out to say it's going to be all right in the end, but that really that's what's more important, because there's these things that are lasting. And on the flip side, part of the suffering is because we're free, and God can't just get rid of it all. Right. So those are my long thoughts. Chuck, did you have more on that?
Yeah, boy, as a pastor, you deal with that a lot, and it's a great question, Mark, and this is where I kind of have come down. As I've come down, I don't even try to answer it anymore, because I don't know what the answer is. I don't understand suffering. I feel that when our heart breaks, God's heart breaks too. And I sort of come to it from that perspective. And the idea that in the new church, we're creating a new will. God's giving us a new will and a new understanding. And I think that new will is compassion. And compassion means to suffer with. And there's a way in which we learn to suffer together, and for me, again, not explaining it, but just just really trying to walk with people in those moments, knowing that that's where God shows up. It's the Mr. Rogers bit, watch for the helpers.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really the best we can do, because I frankly don't have a great pat answer for why there's that amount of suffering in the world.
Which, as it should be.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree. It seems unfair, and I like the idea that somehow God has a much bigger view than we ever can, and that everything that happens in this world, He can bring something good out of somehow, someday, somewhere.
I would say in my own life, it's not that I'm at peace with everything that's ever happened to me, but I can see the potential. Like I can see, okay, this is. I would say the best way to sort of understand that is to talk to people who have had great suffering. It seems like hear their take on it and how it's affected them, and if how are they with it now, and where's it gone? Because then we're really getting at the real thing. So anyway, those are a few thoughts. It's a great question. We could talk about it a lot more. We've done a show sort of on it. We'll probably do many more in the future. But let's take a look at our next question. Arsene Lupin, 2008, 1. Who created God? Is there an evil force that opposes God? Okay. So 2 questions. First of all, who created God? So this is the idea of, if you're saying who created the universe, God created it. Well, then who created? You're just pushing it back and back. And I think that, the idea is that everything we see is finite and time based. Everything obeys the laws of time, and everything has a form and structure, is finite in some sense, and because it's like that and independent, it needs some kind of creator. The idea is God is this other substance that isn't in time. So creation implies it needed a starting point. And if that philosophically that rests well with some people, other people say, okay, well, still I need to know who created God. So that's my thought on that one. And the second part, what was the second part of the question? Is there an evil? Oh, yeah, there is. Well, except for it's like with light and darkness. Darkness is the absence. So really, in these numbers around where I got these from today, Swedenborg says that good and truth make something, and not going with good and truth creates nothing, which is this vacuum that Swedenborg does not say that there's some kind of devil from eternity or something that is creating evil. It's a rejection of good, and what you're left with is vacuum that you're left with. So my initial thoughts, Chuck, yours?
Yeah, that's spot on, Chris. I love the idea that with light and darkness, that again, the darkness is just absence of light. No amount of darkness can overcome the light, and any amount of light starts to overcome the darkness. Mm-hmm. And I think that's our job. Like, how do we breathe light into it? Rachel Naomi Remen, in talking about the gift of some of those things, in her book, My Grandfather's Wisdom, she talked about that she hated the dark pieces of the puzzle, so she tried to hide them. Her father was a big puzzle maker, and she would try to hide the dark pieces, and her father realized, came to her because he couldn't finish the puzzle without the dark pieces. And I think that's where evil can be a contrasting opposite, which actually, in a way, can actually help us to see light better. Just like shadow in a painting can actually help us to see the light in the painting much more effectively.
Right. Excellent. Cara, do you have anything to add?
Amen.
Okay, well then I'll take your time slot because I thought of something.
Oh, good.
Because you can say like, okay, there's no force that opposes God, but evil. When I say evil, I mean like destructive impulses. Right. These kinds of things can be very, very real and very seem very forceful. And how is that nothing? But the way that Swedenborg describes it is it's an inversion or twisting of the system, so that the vital energy that's supposed to be good, it's like if if there's a pipe that's clogged in your house, the water pressure can build up or and explode or something like that. If something goes awry in your hot water heater, the pressure can build up and explode. It's because it's the stuff that's supposed to be moving through there can't now, and you get this whole adverse effect. And it'd be the same kind of thing that there is, because of the damage to human psychology that negative actions does. People get hurt and then they hurt other people. These kinds of that's the nature of of the evil force. It's a perversion of the good force. It's not its own force. It's what happens when you break the container for the good force. So let's take a look at another question. This is from Ian. What does Swedenborg say about the forgiveness of sins? Are we forgiven if we forsake sin and live in a heavenly state of mind, or do we need to have knowledge of Jesus and the cross to be forgiven? All right, so Chuck, man, aren't you a minister guy?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so what you say the first thing about that then?
Ian, that is first off really intelligent question. And from the new church perspective, we're forgiven by God right off the bat. Like there is no non-forgiveness. God forgives, and Cara had referenced it before. The real question is, how close are we going to draw to God or not? God will be the presence there. And either we're open to it and moving towards it, or we're moving away from it. That seeking forgiveness of others and making amends is a way that we move towards. Like we have to be accountable for those areas where we've harmed other people, where we've harmed God, where we've harmed the environment. And as we do that, as we forgive and reconcile, we're able to move closer to God, because it's similar to what you're saying. We're not twisting things up anymore. We're letting things flow. And there's a way in which we're forgiveness where, man, we can just start to put it down. We can start to put it down. We can get clean. We can get clear. And we can start to move beyond our small selves into our true selves.
Yeah, very good. And it makes me think of, so in the Christian worldview or traditional, some different branches of Christianity, there's this idea of original sin, and that we all from birth have committed, or if we've ever lied or anything like that there's this, we are so guilty that God has to forgive us. And that's not necessarily the Swedenborgian paradigm. I mean, this is much more of, it's only tendency, like a desire and a doing of evil that causes a problem, and so it's not like God is never like, oh, I can't believe you are so evil, or you have such evil thoughts, or you want to do evil things, or you have done it. God is never going to be at the point where he's like, I don't want to help you anymore. But it's just it's more about, okay, you have to be willing to change.
Right.
If you're not, so it's more. Heaven is only not attainable. It's not a sentencing thing. It's you can't come in here if you're going to come in and hurt people.
Right.
That kind of
right. And what I was thinking of, Curtis, and again, it's a great question. With how we would view the cross. The cross, the power of the cross from a new church angle is Christ's clear statement that the pain stops here. And that modeling of that. No, the pain, the violence, the cruelty, the anger, the hatred, the vengeance, it stops here. That's amazingly powerful. And that's very different than sort of a transaction, a sacrifice of sorts. And to me, that opens it up to this view of the cross that's not about a transaction, but it's about transformation.
And Cara, so does Swedenborg say that you have to know about Jesus and the cross to be forgiven?
That's exactly what I wanted to talk about.
Okay, there you go. I could sense, see it in your eyes. Okay, so go ahead.
One of the things I love about Swedenborg's teachings is this thought that you don't have to be a Christian or anything to make it to heaven, or to get heaven in you, like I was saying before.
Yeah.
That anybody who has some kind of higher power and is living according to what that higher power lays out, as order, or as the way it is, or as goodness, that's what Swedenborg's requirement is for like getting to heaven, which would imply forgiveness.
Yeah. I was just recently reading Swedenborg said, people love the Lord who love to do God's commandments. And God's commandments is another way to say love one another as I have loved you. So regardless of your intellectual take on life, if how I read it is, if you are interacting, if you come across love in life, and you are saying, okay, I want to be kind to other people, I want to step outside of vengeance and cruelty and hatred and all these things, that is an interaction with God. So you don't have to have a specific creed. They can be very helpful, specific truths and knowledges, but there's not this bottom line sort of requirement. Okay, so I think we have one more here before we close. This is from Rich. Does Swedenborg talk about we all come here with specific lessons we are here to learn, which may be different for each of us? So I know that what you're referring to is kind of like it's a pretty big theme in sort of modern spirituality, or this we're learning lessons here. And I would say yes, and there's sort of nuances on it. Swedenborg talks about how each person is unique and actually is meant to be their own, as he puts it, feelings of love, or you see the world, experience it in a way that nobody else does, and you can serve a particular use, or you can be of particular service to the human race in a way that nobody else can. And the experiences of our lives are here to, so we can learn and what he would call regenerate, which is to choose good and push away what's bad. So in those, there are definitely elements of that there in it. What do you guys think when you hear that, Chuck?
Yeah, I'm thinking of that great quote, that in our lives, it tends to be that we get the lesson and we get the test, but in God's providence, it seems we get the test and then we learn the lesson.
Yeah.
And yet God doesn't test us per se. I think we have parts of us that are broken, and those parts will be the parts that end up testing us. When we do things that are cruel or angry or whatever, those are the parts that end up really testing us. And we come here to learn how to push more and more of that aside so we can become more and more of that connection, more and more of that oneness with God, where we're part of His providence. And just that simple idea that we get to live into a Christian life that's very simple and very generous. I think that's where we want to be.
Yeah, Carl.
Just not the kind of picture of, like in the Old Testament, of Jehovah throwing lightning bolts. It's not like he's saying, Ian or whoever you were.
I don't even know your name.
You need to learn this lesson. Kaboom!
Yeah,
it's
right.
I don't think it's like that.
Right. Yes, because there are some very tough lessons. So it is that there is a point. There is a meaning to everything that we go through, and everything, as Swedenborg talks about, that it's like your life is like a bunch of piles of building materials, and God sees the house, the divine sees the house that's going to be made out of it. So everything is for a reason. It's not the same as okay. Oh, you want to know what it's like to have this horrible thing happen? There you go. But at the same time, all providence, everything in our lives is working to reform the spirit. To make it, to open us so that we can allow heaven in.
Right. And
that happens in a million ways. And this gets back to the problem of evil question we got before. Everything is opening the spirit so that God can come in. Because once, and watch how I'm going to wrap this up, because once the spirit is open, then God and you have this partnership, and then you experience what's called heaven, and then you got the point of creation, because that's what it's all about. So we'll be right back to finish up the show. Okay, and now we close with rather than a cognitive exercise, sort of an emotional exercise, which was this segment we call correspondences. And it's the idea that we can sort of see images of these internal spiritual processes in external physical things of all kinds. Today we're going to be looking at sunrises. I just want to bounce this off you guys first. Chuck, what does a sunrise sort of signify to you in terms of spirituality or life metaphor?
I remember reading a place where Swedenborg was talking about peace in heaven, and he said peace is like waking up on a spring morning. And I love that idea of that sunrise. Like we tend to think, oh boy, I can't wait to have nothing to do. And I don't think that's what God's asking us. I see him asking us to look at the world like a sunrise, as this thing, as a portal that's constantly opening up before us in all kinds of exciting and fascinating ways.
Sounds good, man. Cara?
Yeah, just in this conversation we've been having about suffering, I think of a sunrise as the potential after suffering, the hope that comes, the joy that comes, the potential. And I think of that Bible passage, weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning.
Yes, and so certainly, both of those, that Swedenborg does talk a lot about heaven as like morning and spring, like this even though you're there, it's always a beginning of something new. And yet then also the sunrise being the night has just ended. We were talking in the question segment about the sort of night times of life. Like, this is really hard. I don't like this. The sunrise, when light first comes onto the land, like, now I understand why this all happened. So those are some things. Just take a look at these images and see what comes to you. And I think it's been longer than it should be since I've seen a real sunrise. But it is a cool feeling to get to experience one. So if you guys want to, obviously going and feeling a real one while keeping your mind on those ideas could be a lot more powerful. If you guys enjoyed the show today, feel free to support it. We have a donation link in the description of this video. Your money goes to the Swedenborg Foundation, which puts this on. It's a nonprofit, so it's all tax deductible. Everything like that. Tomorrow is Giving Tuesday, so you might want to make us your charity that you give to. Thanks very much for considering. Just open up the description link here, click it, and it should take you to PayPal. Chuck, Cara, thank you so much. It's been awesome having you both on the show, and thanks, friend. We hope to have you back soon.
Thanks, Curtis.
Great to be here.
All right, and we'll see the rest of you here next Monday, same time, and hope you have a great week in between.